So I wanted to welcome everyone and thank them for joining us for our third installment of the Chalk Talks that we're hosting here this semester. We are going to be talking about the state of youth sport with Jon Solomon with the Aspen Institute and Dr. Matt Bowers with the University of Texas at Austin. And so I'll turn it over to the two of you to just give a little bit of an introduction about yourself and how you've gotten involved with youth sport, and then we'll kick it off.
Jon?
Sure, I'll start. So great to be here. Thank you for having me. My name's Jon Solomon. I'm editorial director for the Aspen Institute Sports and Society program. And our main initiative is called Project Play, which develops, applies, and shares knowledge to help stakeholders build healthy communities through sports. What we really try to do is try to think strategically about how to grow youth sports participation so all kids have quality access to it. And I've been at the Aspen Institute for about 3 years and looking forward to the conversation. And I've interviewed Matt in the past, so it's fun to be on a panel with him together.
It is. This is really fun. These are some of my favorite people to talk about youth sports with. So I'm really excited to be here. And before I introduce myself, I should say Jon is very modest and he wouldn't toot his own horn, but the work that Aspen has been doing, and Jon in particular this summer, spring and summer and fall, covering COVID-19 and youth sports has been the best coverage of this issue anywhere that I've read. And so it's a privilege to be able to talk with Bree, who also spends a lot of time in this space, and Jon. My name is Matt Bowers. I am a faculty member in the sport management program at the University of Texas at Austin. And I study youth sports. I study the systems and the policies and the programs that we have for youth sports, and with an effort towards trying to make them work better for kids and for developing elite athletes. And so I have a particular interest in sort of these less structured types of sports settings, sandlot, pickup, even video games, and the way that these can kind of play a role in our sports experiences. And so I've also had the good fortune of working with Aspen on some projects. I am currently a member of the science board for the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition. And I'm really excited to be here and as well and to talk today.
Great, and as Matt said, we both have done work and actually have an article, The Confederation of Rivals, that's have to pull the cobwebs off of that one that we've written together. But and I also am on a coalition that's helping to work to restructure youth sport as well. So we all have a very vested interest in providing great systems for delivery and opportunities for our youth. And I think we all probably have very strong opinions about how it currently is organized. So what I'd like to start off our conversation with is, what do you think the state of youth sport was in pre-COVID, just to get a general sense of our thinking before all of the crisis hit?
I'll lead off, I guess, just so we don't go in the same pattern every time. I think pre-COVID, we were making some progress. I think there's different ways that you can look at and evaluate how youth sports is doing. And, the way that I tend to come at it is from a place of trying to make sure that we are providing the best sports experiences we can to not only train elite athletes, but to give kids good, meaningful, developmentally appropriate and developmentally impactful experiences in youth sports. And I think in the U.S. this is an issue we wrestle with all the time. We've got a system, if you will, and it's loosely a system that kind of naturally responds to market forces and market pressures to become about more elite production, more serious commercial elements of sports. And so that's kind of pulled youth sports in alongside of it. And I think a lot of the work that organizations like the Aspen Institute have been doing has been helping to recalibrate a little bit, to bring a lot of these big players to the table to talk about how we reform youth sports from the big sports leagues to the USOC, the NCAA, and due almost, entirely to the work that Jon and Tom Ferry and the crew over there have done. We were seeing some real progress in kind of chipping away at some of these problems. And so I think we were trending up a little bit in some ways, or I'd like to think so, with regard to youth sport pre-COVID, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, Matt's actually right, and he doesn't know this, but we're going to be releasing here in the next couple weeks our National State of Play report, and we're looking at some data that's both pre-COVID from 2019 that came from the Sports and Fitness Industry Association, and then also current data during COVID, which is a national survey that we're doing with Utah State University of surveying youth sports parents. And right now, the data from pre-COVID did show some progress, like Matt was talking about. We saw more kids participating in sports, ages 6 to 12, and as well ages 13 to 17. A lot of individual sport participation was up. Baseball, soccer, I mean, tackle football even a little bit was up. Gymnastics was up quite a bit. And this is participation like on a regular basis, which usually means like organized sports. Another positive sign as well was coach training. A lot more coaches, a higher percentage of youth sports coaches were getting trained in key areas like concussion management and basic CPR and first aid and effective motivational techniques and sports skills. And that's a really important factor because a lot of research shows that if kids don't have a good coach, that could lead them to not return in the future. The negative still, although there was still a little bit of positive this pre-COVID, was we were starting to see, for the first time in a while, a little upward trend in participation for the lowest socioeconomic category. So kids in household incomes of under $25,000 per year were starting to participate a little bit more, but the gap was still huge compared to the $50,000 range, $75,000, $100,000 range. But there was some progress, and now as I'm sure we'll get to, we'll see what happens here with the pandemic.
And I think, you guys are talking about, trends and systems and things. And a lot of my work in the area is really at the more the micro level, talking to the athletes and the children themselves. And, my biggest frustration that I really haven't seen change a lot is that the lived experiences and the children's voices aren't really at the table as much in these decisions. Not only within the households, parents saying you need to do this sport or you need to play sports because it does X, Y, Z for your future and or your development, but also at the larger table when we're talking about structures and systems. And so I think for me, what is always frustrating and disheartening is that we're seeing student or kids, they play because they want to have fun. They play because they want to be with their friends. They don't necessarily play because they see where it can lead them in the future. And then with that, we see burnout and injuries that are happening at younger ages than they should be happening. And then also just, exclusion because they're not developing fast enough to keep up with other kids. And so they're, kind of fall out of sport and there's nothing there to pick them up and pull them into different types of sports or, so we don't really have those structures in place yet. So I'm wondering, with the positive movements you guys have seen at the higher level, do you see some of that maybe trickling down into the more meso and micro levels of how we manage our youth sport systems?
I wish I could have give like a resounding yes, but I think part of the problem is our youth sports systems are designed by and for adults, basically. And a lot of the root of the things that we point to as frustrations and problems comes from that very fact, and I think both you and I, Bree, are always really interested in that smaller scale experience for a kid. And that's why I'm fascinated by these like kid-led settings like pickup and sandlot and whatnot, where adults don't really play as much of a role. Aspen Institute, Jon's organization, rolled out a number of years ago now, like 8 plays for, getting kids back into the game. And a couple of those plays really relate to this, one of which is ask kids what they want. We really don't do that. And I think, it's not a conscious effort to like suppress the, you know, the voice of kids. It's just, we don't ask kids what they think about much, you know, much of anything. So it's, I think that's something that's really missing from even the reform efforts and the progress that we've seen. And when you look to, you know, I'll sometimes talk about this example. I was giving a talk to a group of high-level sport policymakers and all, and I was talking about, actually Tom Ferry and I were giving the talk together, and we were talking about what sports can learn from video games, and that made everybody mad. But basically, you know, when we point to like, well, why does a kid choose video games over going outside to play sports? In part, it's because of the way that video games are designed around kids as the end user, and they specifically tailor the experience to be one that is, you know, if you fail, you can try again immediately. You can interact with your friends on your own terms without adults being around. You know, it kind of checks all these boxes of things that we think regular sports could actually benefit from in some form. And so, yeah, I wish I could say I'd felt more progress in this area. Maybe John feels more optimistic.
No, not quite. Not that much, unfortunately. But I think Matt hit the nail on the head, right? The video games is a great analogy. There's so much that we can learn from the video games. I mean, even just the fact of video games let kids tailor their own experience and play with their friends, you know, and you don't have adults looking over their shoulder every minute screaming, shoot, pass, you know, score. You know, like imagine like being at work and having someone yell, Matt, type, Matt. No, really, type right now, type. And like, that's what we do at our games and our practices. And, you know, like I'm a youth sports coach and I have to, you know, caution myself sometimes, hey, let's just let them play sometimes during the games at that point. Otherwise you're just their minds are gonna get frozen. I think free play is a real opportunity though, Bree, to your point earlier about trying to get kids to have more ownership, I guess, of their experiences. And you know, anecdotally, I hear that some during the pandemic because things have been shut down, you know, organized sports for a while, and kids needed to do something, right? So the bike sales spiked incredibly, you know, over the past several months. You can't buy a bike right now. You got to go on like waiting lists for a month or two. My kids are riding bikes for the first time. Everyone in our neighborhood in Maryland are riding bikes. Or just kids going out and finding their own experiences through, you know, pickup games and shooting hoops, and, you know, or parents maybe even coming with them if you have like safety concerns, they're too young, but it's just coming with them to monitor them and just sit back and let them, you know, experience whatever they want out of sports.
I think this is a great opportunity to kind of segue into what we're seeing during COVID, because one of the unique things about New York is that they've opened up streets that are typically obviously closed to pedestrians. And there's little kids, you know, with their little scooters and their bikes and even balls at times, you know, playing in those opened areas that are typically not. And so I think that's a really unique thing we've seen where, you know, they realize that there needs to be more space. But then, and just watching these kids in parks, and like I was sitting out in the park one day with these two little boys, and they just created this entire game that was sort of sport, but sort of magical. And they were using their imagination and creativity, and there was just so much happening, and they were negotiating conflict and rules and, you know, all these things for their game. And it's like, that is what we're missing, I think, a lot of times. And I know, Matt, this is a great area where you do a lot of research, but you know, what can we learn during COVID that we can watch in our children and maybe then use going forward?
I mean, that might be the biggest thing right there, is just everything paused. And so all our typical kind of institutions and structures and all the things that you get kind of swept up into the rhythms of all stopped. And so, you know, when you're looking for opportunities to be physically active, to run your kids around because you need to run them around, or everybody will go crazy, you know, it sort of forced this back upon us in a way. And so, I mean, that's been one of the areas I've been most optimistic about. I don't think it's been quite as revolutionary as I would have hoped during this time. But as you point out, like closing off streets to create, spaces for kids to play. And that's not that's an old idea, but one that we've gone away from. When you look back, even when Dwight Eisenhower started the Council on Youth Fitness, which then became the President's Council, one of the first things that they did was they had a campaign of creating these play streets where they would close them off and create opportunities. And this is, very late 50s, right? And so these are kind of, we need to return to some of these old ideas of kids being able to go out and play until the dinner bell, rings, or you call them back in. And I should say, it can sound kind of naive to say that, because we've moved so far away from that for a confluence of reasons, a number of reasons why we don't see kids playing as much. But one that I think it often goes sort of unrecognized or unnoticed is the fact that, like, as adults, we don't play either anymore. Or maybe we never really did like we could, but I think part of helping our kids relearn how to play, which is what we basically have to do as a society, we as adults have to figure out how we relearn how to play as well. And maybe this time where we're all home with family and killing time and just, maybe this is an opportunity for even adults to relearn it so that we can help recognize the value in it.
Yeah, no, I think Matt's right. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of research to this. I just know anecdotally, I know it's with my kids at least. Kids mirror their parents, right? And if they see their parents being physically active and playing games, or going for walks or going for jogs or riding bikes, that influences them. They want to like be part of that. If they don't see them doing that, then I think they're less inclined. One thing that I've done sometimes with my kids is just create creative games outside with different sports. We actually even call it the whatchamacallit games. And it's with my 11-year-old and 13-year-old sons. And we just bring different balls and equipment out to like a blacktop at the school. And it's a competition between the two of them. But I just want to get them moving and like physically active. Because what's really happened, to Matt's point earlier, like, I mean, growing up, Matt, you were probably the same way. Like, you play outside, pick up sports with your friends until it's dark, and your parents sometimes have to come find you, because it's time to come in. It's dinner, or it's homework, or bed. And we lost that like in the last couple decades. It's been going for a while. And, there was a dad I know was a youth hockey coach for his son. And he was saying just how enjoyable it is just seeing his kids be able to enjoy free play right now, instead of being in this regimented schedule that he normally has. But he's even tried free play once at a practice with the kids at the ice rink and said, all right, you kids are just all on your own. Go, go play, go, create a game. And for the first 10 minutes or so, they didn't know what to do.
Yeah,
they literally don't know like how to play. And then,
yeah.
The dad called one of the captains over and said, here's what you do, like pick up sides and said like, and create teams, you're on this team, you're on that team, and then get it started. And I do think there is an opportunity for free play. In our survey of youth sports parents that we did in June, individual pickup sports and neighborhood pickup games were the areas that parents are the most comfortable with their kids returning as restrictions remove.
Yeah.
They're less comfortable in school sports, less comfortable in even community-based organized sports, much less comfortable in travel and elite sports as well, because you're going into different parts of the regions and country.
Yeah, I think play is being embraced a little bit more at the higher levels than it has been. Over the last couple of decades, you see like U.S. soccer is adopting this PPP model, this practice play model. So you're feeling this start to make its way into our development systems a little bit, and that's where it needs to be. And that's been my argument in my own work, is that it's not about getting rid of youth sports and or organized sports, and the organized sports experience, but it's about recognizing the value that a more holistic approach to a kid's physical activity and sport experience can can benefit from when you integrate alongside the organized sports and organized activities, these opportunities for less structure, more kid-directed play. And that's where we see the benefits, according to the work that I've done and the studies that I've done. So yeah, it actually wouldn't necessarily take that much to feel a real reverberation if we could just pivot a little bit to integrating more play and more fun into what kids do. It's really, it matters. And being physically active, I wanted to come back actually, Jon, and ask you something. You guys have that great infographic with the intergenerational cycle and physical activity. I'm not testing you right now. I'm seeing if you remember, and because you were making the point of like the importance of just being out and physically active. And I think people don't realize, and you may be able to speak to the specific data points a little bit better than I will, but people don't realize that according to what we know, if you are a more physically active parent, you are likely to produce a more physically active kid. And that leads to all this whole host of benefits and this whole host of kind of reduction of kind of negative outcomes and things. But then what's also fascinating about that is because you were a more physically active kid, you're more likely to be a physically active adult, and that intergenerational cycle repeats itself. And the challenge is it can also go the other direction. If you aren't physically active, you don't produce physically active kids, and you see these and then you go into that spiral too. So I don't know, so, the things you were saying, Jon, kind of made me think about that. That's a really powerful infographic. And I think it speaks to the broader importance of just building in physical activity through play, and through just kind of less formal structures.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I just shared it there in the chat.
Wow, look at you.
See. It's a chart we did, and active kids do better in life. And right, active kids are less likely to be obese. They're going to have higher test scores, usually less smoking and drug use, more likely to go to college, higher self-esteem, on and on. And it becomes cyclical throughout their life too, right? That's the most important part, is that they're building these habits and healthy habits at young ages. Because if you try having to create healthy, active lifestyles even if you're starting like high school age, or up, that's going to be really hard. Even middle school may be hard, for some kids.
Yeah, I think that's some of the things that I'm finding in my own research is that, it's interesting because there's like two camps of people, it seems, in the adult, those that remain participating in sport. There's people who are like really high level, elite level, and just transition and kind of and continue to compete into older life, and have stayed active and participated in sport, or just being physically active and fit. And then there's this other camp of people who got brutally burned out, hated their sport that they were in, dropped out for a while, but then realized, but it was still kind of part of their blood. So they came back to sport, but they came back to something completely different. So I think I would be a good example of that, in that just from my own experience, in that I was an elite level gymnast. I was completely burned out. My career was ended by a severe injury. And then I was like just sick of that level, and I was done for a while. And then I found my way back, and now, I'm in a sport that I can be very highly competitive as an amateur. So triathlon allows me to do that if I want to, or I can just compete against the clock and, get better on my own way. And it's interesting that, that the infographic kind of aligns with that, but also kids are sponges, and they do see us. And so like being that role model and preparing, and helping them get into that type of lifestyle, I think is important from a parent perspective. But it seems like in my research from parents, it's all about, more so about like the elite ranks, the scholarship, the future, the higher level elite stuff, versus the lifelong importance of participating in sport and what that can mean for your health. And so I'm just wondering, based on the stuff you guys have done, are those some of the narratives you've heard as well? And how do we begin to shift the parents into thinking about the lifelong health benefits versus the short-term potentially not even able to achieve elite level goals that they seem to think their kids can do by doing youth sport.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot to that. We were pleasantly surprised, pleased in our youth sports parent survey in June, and we're in the process of fielding another one now here in September. And one of the questions was, what outcome do you want most for your child from their sports experience? And I mean, at the very top are the things that we want to see. They want them to be physically active. They want positive mental health. They want good peer relationships, and competition ranked, much lower, near the bottom. Now, there's no question that the chase for the college scholarship and the chase for just being admitted into colleges, right? Not necessarily with a scholarship, but just getting preferential admission because you're an athlete. That's a big driver for many parents. I tend to think that most parents, youth sports parents, actually are pretty sane, but a lot of them aren't empowered and aren't educated about what good should look like in youth sports. And they're just sort of caught up in this system that they just inherited, and it becomes this vicious cycle because other people are doing what needs to be done and specializing at really young ages and spending a lot of money and traveling a lot and a lot of time into it. And as a parent, you feel like, oh my gosh, if I don't do that or something similar, my child's not even going to have a chance to make the high school team, much less college or pros, which are huge long shots. So it's about, and I think there also are parents who feel like if they do speak up, even if they do think that their experience is not a good one for their child, they may get blackballed. There may be consequences for their child by speaking up, or they don't even know how to speak up to the coach or the sports organization because it's just something that they don't have the time to learn, who does, or really the confidence to do so. But if we can change the parent behavior and help educate them, which is something we tried to do at Project Play last year with our Don't Retire Kid campaign in partnership with ESPN, if we can better empower parents, they're the consumers, then they can potentially be demanding from the coaches, from the leagues, hey, no, this is really what we want out of this experience. And the flip side of that, real briefly, is though, I think there needs to be an alternative in between. Right now, it's like the travel elite sports experience, and then it's the recreational, and people feel like you're just picking grass, kids picking grass and not really learning skills. And there needs to be an affordable but quality alternative in between. And that's where we think like parks and rec departments have a real opportunity right now because there are going to be people maybe rethinking their experiences and maybe aren't going to be able to afford the travel sports experience as much, but you have to give them a quality alternative in between so they still feel like they're learning skills and having fun, but maybe it's just not quite as extreme as travel sports.
Yeah, you're dead on with a bunch of stuff there, Jon. And I think one of the interesting things we've seen with this is that so many of our reform efforts, if you can call them that, so many of our efforts to make sports better have been focused on the sort of supply side of this equation, and we've not done enough. And I've co-written some articles about this. We've not done enough to shift demand. We've not actually we've changed what we're offering, and then people just go away and then find something else that meets the demands that they have for what they want their youth, or what they think they want the experience to be. And so we're sort of chasing this ideal parent consumer by providing them with these opportunities, but we're not actually like shifting the way that they think about this. And Aspen's been really good about trying to give tools to parents, trying to help in this process. Jon and I, the project we probably worked most together on was something called the Healthy Sport Index, which is a first of its kind tool to try to help parents think a little bit more about what they want for their kids and what aspects of kind of health they may emphasize over others. And that was through a collaboration with New York's own Hospital for Special Surgery there. And it was a really cool tool that has, I think, not probably been adopted as much as we would have liked it to, because in part, is like we're sort of, again, kind of adjusting the supply, even in the way that we talk about this stuff. We're not really like digging into what parents want. And I've been thinking about this disconnect a lot lately, and I don't have a really articulate way of putting this, but one of the ideas I've been kicking around is this notion that when we're trying to like make sports better, we tend to treat it as if the kid is looking for something to do and we're going to help them do that better. But I think the disconnect is so many parents these days aren't looking for something for their kid to do. They're looking for someone for their kid to become and be. And they're invested in this idea of their child reaching their fullest potential, and they're willing to invest these resources in it in ways that actually like we don't appreciate and accommodate for in the way that we try to then serve them and create better experiences. And so I think we've got a disconnect in all these well-intentioned efforts that I'm heavily, a part of myself, in not really acknowledging, how we connect with the demand side for parents in particular. I just think it's everything in this, and we've not yet figured out how to negotiate that and manage it.
So we're kind of dancing around my next question a little bit, and it's really about, how, if you could reimagine the youth sport structure, what might that look like? And for me, I'm like, we have a couple of questions that popped up here in the chat that kind of address what I struggle with. So my whole area is, access and opportunity. What can we provide? How can we, provide better delivery systems for not only youth, but up through adults? And one of the hardest parts for me with us moving to this whole, meritocracy and, market-driven type sport offerings is that there's this whole segment of underserved and disadvantaged children who, are not getting the funding and the support and the resources into programs that could help them. And it's just dividing that chasm's getting wider and wider. And that worries me quite a bit. So I'm just curious, as we think about re-envisioning and what we could do to better provide for our youth, what are some of the ways in which we can close that gap in your minds?
I think the gap is only going to widen right now with regard to the impact that COVID has had, because of the fact that I don't think our incentive structure has fundamentally shifted. I wrote a little bit about this, kind of speculating early on in the COVID era, where it's like, what really could, we have a potential like external shock to a system, which you rarely get, like a true shock to the way that a system operates. And I spent a lot of time thinking about like, what could really reorient the way that sports work? And I think it all comes back to like, there needs to be a shift in those incentives that are driving the behaviors that we don't believe to be advantageous. And so I started wondering like, well, if college sports doesn't recover, and I'm not saying these are thought experiments, this is not like what I want to happen. If college sports doesn't recover, is that better for youth sports? I mean, it's like a question I hate asking, but it's also one that when I look at what levers there are to potentially pull to make some fundamental change, there aren't a lot because of the way that we are oriented. So, and I don't think even when I wrote that early in this period and then seeing how things have played out, and college sports have taken a big hit in many regards, but the ones taking the brunt of that hit, the sports taking the brunt of that hit are, Olympic sports, are non-revenue generating types of sports. And so I don't know that it's actually, maybe it's somehow going to make it worse, because then we're funneling more money into football, men's basketball, baseball, women's basketball, et cetera. So I don't have a great answer to that, but it's one that I've been thinking a lot about myself. So.
Yeah, I think, no, it's an interesting question, right? If college sports keeps cutting programs, which I think they're going to, man, I think you and I may have talked about this once, like, does it hurt or help youth sports? I think it might end up actually hurting youth sports, unfortunately, because even though there will be fewer scholarship opportunities, it may just drive parents even more and say, oh, there are fewer opportunities. Now we have to specialize even at a younger age. And what's also coming down the pike in college sports that's going to be interesting for youth sports is name, image, and likeness payments that are going to be coming in the next year, where athletes in college are going to be allowed to make money off their own name from third parties, sponsors. And you got to think that's going to trickle down in some way to high school sports, maybe into youth sports, because parents will see, oh, you've got a chance to make money. You don't have to wait till pros to make it legally. You could actually make it in college. But Bree, to your initial question, one thing that youth sports in our country can consider more is, embracing sports governance, right? I mean, we're one of the only, a rare country in the world, that doesn't have a sport ministry, and there are pros and cons of that, both ways. But what happened during the pandemic was, youth sports, in some cases, when it was one of the last to shut down, there were some who were really pushing the envelope. And in many cases, they were the first to return. And right now, you've got a lot of chaos in youth sports about what return to play should look like. It varies by community to community. I mean, it's not even state to state. It's just like city to city, county to county, and a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. No one knows what to believe, who to trust. They're not sure what data to believe. And you see, protests and, not much unlike what's happening in a lot of our society these days. But, do you create outdoor recreation commissions, if you're a policy leader, or governor, to work with, industry partners across sectors? If you work in public health or the federal government, do you create more data that can really help drive a lot of these decisions? We and Matt knows this really well. We still have very little data, really good data in youth sports that could be a huge help to be able to, track a lot of these issues that we're talking about.
And that comes from the fact that we don't have a kind of centralized governance structure. We don't have coordination at that level. And so everything is kind of decentralized down market level. And we don't have data because there's no coordinated way to really collect that. And Aspen is probably one of the best data sources we've ever had on this, in just the work that they've been doing. But beyond that, you have to look to the actual sporting goods industry for any kind of like usable data to try to understand this. So Jon raises a really interesting point. It's something Bree and I have talked about over the years for sure. The US has been very resistant to any kind of federal structuring of kind of national sport policy. And they've had opportunities over the decades to do that, and have chosen, at least implicitly, not to focus on those things. Now may be one of the best opportunities we have, if that's something that we want to pursue, because of the chaos in the return from COVID. But again, I think our socio-political structures are designed to be federalist, to be at the state level and handle that. And we try our, as we might, we do not like to mandate things or to coordinate at the federal level unless we absolutely have to. And so I'm not optimistic. I love the idea that Jon's putting out, and it's something that you can pull from great models around the globe. But we have resisted that just about every chance we could. And so I'm not holding my breath over it.
Well, and I'm not either. And, I'm, having been in the Australian system and understanding theirs, and granted, I think part of the struggle with us in the United States is not only are we resistant to federal oversight and support there, but we also are massive. Yeah. And so, we have some states that have tons and tons of people, and others that are very sparse. And, it's hard to create opportunities for resource in Montana, where, it might be a lot easier in the New York area. So That is a big struggle, and just how different we are across the states. But we had a question pop up from Arturo, and he says, is there a way to regulate the safety outside of COVID protocols like concussion, musculoskeletal, injuries, et cetera? And I think that would be one way. If we had a federal oversight system, we could better regulate certain protocols for training time, injuries, how young children can advance up into the elite ranks, putting certain standards in place by sport. That could be something that would help us perhaps on the burnout, injury, waiting for developmental levels, for appropriate developmental levels as far as, advancements and things like that. And it could also help with funding. And I think, if we have, a certain amount of money flowing into the states for, underserved populations, that could be a really great opportunity. And like you said, working with Parks and Rec, we all have, there's a Parks and Rec system in every single state that could be easily mobilized and utilized in this way, especially for getting federal funding in there. But one area I think I always like to pose this question because it's it's definitely a minority view and nobody agrees with me really, but I don't think it should be in the education system. I think we need to separate education and sport completely. I think that would help us at the collegiate level, because it wouldn't be about participating in sport for an education. It would be, your educational opportunities, and you follow that path, and you have your sport opportunities. And I think a lot of issues that we face that I don't have a ton of time to get into because I would like for us to be able to address some questions, but I'm wondering if the redesign is without sport in schools, and we rethink how they are structured outside of that.
It's interesting you bring that up. So we're actually in the process of starting our second phase of Project Play, which it began with ages 6 to 12, and that was the real focus because the foundation of youth sports. And now we're looking at school sports, and particularly high school sports. And we have a new initiative called Reimagining School Sports in America, where we are trying to think of new ideas about what does physical activity and sports look like in high schools to reach the broadest population of students possible, not for competitive purposes and all that, but so we're soliciting from a lot of people new ideas, and we have a national search and a contest, and there's $20,000 awards to 8 different high schools that are part of it, and it's going to be going on throughout 2021. But those are the ideas we're going to be trying to approach, and with roundtables and different experts on that.
And it's a double-edged sword for me in that regard, because it's publicly funded or supported programs so our underserved students and children have access to sport in schools. But with that being said, not everybody's getting that access. It's still very elitist, and it's not, school sport isn't playing out potentially how we intended when we first said it was a good idea to put sport in schools. And so because those facilities still exist doesn't mean that there can't be third-party organizations running sport out of those facilities, which would be great funding opportunities for schools. But then that might then give an opportunity for more people to get involved, because it's not so high-level elitist competitive. And the facilities would still be right there at school, that they would just go to a different organization that's producing it for them. So yeah, it's definitely not an easy thing to tackle, and I know we have some questions coming in, so I do want to be aware of those. So with the current, oh crap, it's another one came in. With the current trajectory of high-level sports attrition and low physical literacy rates among children, combined with the rapid lifestyle shift in the last 20 years, I agree with the need to offer an alternative offering within the current sports structure. It's absolutely critical. Perhaps we could ask if our packaging of sports as an offering to children is relevant to them. Do we need to reimagine and redefine what sport means today? So it's a good question, and it goes back to our first discussion about bringing the child into the conversation. But what do you guys think with that question from Claire? Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. That's a really thoughtful question. And we're doing this, right? We have esports now, so we're good, right? Did we somehow miss the point? Miss the point. But no, I mean, I think change ultimately in this regard is going to. There's the sort of like the part of me that wants to make it bottom up, like about the kids and their experience, and they help shape this and tell us. That is the the idealist in me, and that's kind of where I naturally gravitate to. But I think I just think I come back to that same like incentive structure. I think if we don't change the way that the reasons we're putting kids in sports to begin with, and these are at an individual level like completely legitimate, okay reasons for a lot of people. And so I think ultimately change, and we're starting to see it a little bit, is going to have to come from the most commercialized sectors of sports. Like if the NBA, so the NBA came together with USA Basketball a few years back, and they rolled out kind of the first of their kind general guidelines on kind of how much kids should be playing, when they should be taking breaks, et cetera. It was a kind of a modest seeming step, but it was also hadn't really been done before. And so I think if we're going to see change, it's probably, unfortunately, for better or worse, I guess, it's got to come from the ones who are setting the table. And ultimately those in the US and the way that sports work, it's the major pro leagues that really wield a lot of power. And they've been complicit in this system, right? And I don't mean that in a real conspiratorial way. It's a natural, it worked for them. They didn't have to do anything. It was great. They just had athletes like fed to them, and then they got to make money off of that. Cool. But I think we won't see change until that system breaks down and stops serving them. And that's the challenge that I think we're going to face with this is at what point does that actually happen, where the ends no longer justify the means, and we have to kind of reorient this from a top-down structure, which isn't how I normally would approach solving a problem, but I just keep coming back to that in this particular setting.
Yeah, I agree. And I've always thought that it would be, if you think about the club structures in Europe and how, the club itself kind of feeds upward. And it would be really interesting, if we had a Dallas Cowboys club that fed all the way down to the youth level, and people could participate, like adults included, along the way at a recreational level or a semi-competitive level. And, it would be really neat. I remember a colleague that is from the Netherlands. He once said that he used to go to his club with his dad. They both played soccer, and one would go to one field and one would go the other, and then they'd meet back in the middle. And I always thought it would be really unique if we had a system like that, where our adults could stay active and our kids would be active, and they'd be there together in some type of a shared space. And I do agree. I think our pro leagues could play a role here in providing funding, resources, coaching development, scouting development, all that stuff could be, a part of the whole process, not just as you said, they feed up into them. So.
And and Major League Soccer is a little bit closer to that European model. It's not exact. It's very American of us to like take this like club idea from Europe and then take it over here and just be like, oh no, it's not for anybody else. It's for these really, really good, but MLS is doing a little bit of that. Mark Cuban has spoken out about this, at the NBA level of wanting to kind of centralize elite development and things. And so I think there's whispers and there's interest, but again, it's like the policy structures themselves don't really enable these things to happen. And so you kind of run into, you need a public-private partnership to get anything done, basically. And Aspen, Jon's organization has kind of been the de facto, I don't know what the right analogy is, but like the lion tamer or whatever, like trying to get everybody into the ring here and make something, change and happen, and it's just so difficult,
Agreed. Are there any other questions that anyone would like to ask from the participant pool?
I think there was some
Please.
Q&A question. Was there a Q&A?
Yep, we got, we covered those. Yeah, and you just actually even hit more so on that public-private relationship question that.
There was a couple more up top. Mark Hyman asks what we think about youth tackle football participation, the uptick in that Jon noted, and whether that's a good or bad news. And Mark, I'll follow up that question with, do you want me to answer as someone who lives in Texas and who gets paid by the University of Texas, or do you want me to answer it with my rational side of my brain? No, there is, so let's make it a more complex thing. So Jon and I, that Healthy Sport Index we worked on, one of the areas we were looking at in terms of health was the psychosocial types of health, right? The community you can build around that. And when we did our analyses and we got the data back and we broke it down by sports, what sport was number one for boys for psychosocial, like positive outcomes, according to our survey participants? Football. And, I think our sort of advisory board group was like, wait, what? For a second. And then we kind of realized, well, no, because football is built into the fabric of the stories and the narratives that we tell ourselves about who we are and our communities and what they represent. And so, no, that makes sense that you would feel this kind of broader connection to the social side of things by being a part of that experience. And so it's tough because I'm so torn. Like, my son's not going to play tackle football. He'll probably play flag football. And he's very excited, and that's totally cool. But it's tricky because I still love football. I still love watching it. And I'm very torn about that. I see the negative sides of it, and not just the, head injuries, of course, there are other elements, but it's sort of hard to keep up that mental gymnastics, to kind of be not okay with it on some level, and then still, like, making sure I DVR so I don't miss the beginning of the game when we're at, like, it's something I wrestle with a lot. And so I don't know that it's a good thing necessarily that there's an uptick in youth tackle football participation. I'd be hard pressed to say that I find that to be a positive thing. I don't know, Jon, Bree, what do you?
Yeah. And one thing that Aspen, we did a white paper a couple years ago, looking at the question of what if flag football was the standard way you play the game of football until high school? What would be the consequences in different areas? And did a lot of interviews and, look at research and data, and wrote up this white paper. And ultimately our recommendation was that flag should be the form of the game until you get to about middle school, maybe about like age 13, 14, and then you start introducing tackle in practice in safe settings, so they start learning some of the fundamentals. So that it was where my personal opinion would be, is like, let's do flag at the younger ages, particularly, 12 and under, 13 and under, just because we know the risks. We know also that there aren't necessarily some of the best coaches out there at the youth level, and they're not following the proper, training. On the other hand, another point to add to Matt about why tackle football, though, is useful to some kids is the socioeconomic factor too. We know that there are kids in some communities, tends to be more urban or tends to be or rural, who, football is one of their only options to be physically active. There's just not other opportunities to play other sports. Doesn't mean there couldn't be, but there just isn't. So, and particularly if you're overweight, if you're a heavy set 250-pound high school kid, football in your mind may be the only sport you can play, and in reality it may be the only sport. So that's a factor too. If they're not playing football, what's the cost benefit analysis in terms of the injuries versus being physically inactive and continue to be potentially overweight?
Good point. Yeah,
absolutely. So Ryan Snellgrove, hi Ryan. Sorry if you've covered this, but have you seen positive trends in the importance placed on athlete well-being in youth sport?
John, do you guys have any good data or anything on that you've found?
Athlete well-being. Do you think they mean like preventing injuries or like mental well-being or?
What do you mean,
I
Ryan?
would see that as mental, yeah, mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, we are starting to like anecdotally see within the youth sports space a lot more discussion about mental health. And I think it's going to be even more important coming out of the pandemic. And we're trying to link this together. We're trying to understand the social and emotional skills that can be developed through sports and through the proper training of coaches who can learn how to promote personal development. It's not all about the sports skills and the X's and O's and winning and the chase for the scholarship. That being a coach needs to be something bigger than that. And I think it's going to be really important coming out of the pandemic because coaches are going to be on the front line. And there are a lot of kids, there are a lot of adults going through these mental health challenges that are showing a lot of anxiety and depression. And coaches may be in the best position to at least see these red flags. They may not totally know how to deal with it, but at least if they can see it, they can find those kids and you get to get the right attention to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit, to John's point, a little bit of a growth in this area because I think it's filtering down from society. You know, there's a little bit more of this is talked about more. We're much more focused than we used to be on wellness, mindfulness, these types of kind of mental health issues. And so I think we're feeling that a little bit in the youth setting. You know, it's interesting when I think about where I see like rapid progress in my own kind of anecdotal working with organizations and stuff. It's when I really just like trick people about like why they're doing something, which seems terrible. But, you know, like for one example, I was like running into a brick wall for years and years and years about like getting at the grassroots level, getting organizations to appreciate and understand the value that play can have and the value that less structure can bring to the experience. And so the parents and the coaches would all say like, oh, you're great. You're right. We love that. And like, that was like when we were kids and this and that, and then they wouldn't do any of it. And so I was trying something new in the last couple of years that actually has been more effective, which is coming at it from a point of saying, actually, your kid is deficient in play, and it's going to affect that kid's long-term athlete development and ability to reach the highest levels. And it's like, it's a weird, the outcome, like what I'm asking them to do is the same, but their receptivity to it is so much greater by framing it in terms of like, well, you know, you might fall behind actually if you don't let your kid play a little bit more, which is like a totally cruel and maybe unethical thing to, it's not untrue, but I think it's the same with mental well-being, to Ryan's question, and the way that we think about this. It's like, well, if we frame mindfulness as an elite performance tool, we'll see like widespread adoption, you know, like, and I don't know how to navigate that, you know, but I felt it at the grassroots level that seems to be what catches people's attention. And so maybe we just need a totally new campaign for how we address all of these things and use fear mongering, use, you know, whatever we can to get people to do it. So I don't know. This isn't advice that I'm offering for everyone to do, but it's just kind of sharing my own experiences and frustration trying to get folks to do things that you know is supported in the research, that has clear benefits for the kids, and finding a unique kind of pathway to getting that done.
And so our last three questions, I'm going to kind of pose them together because I can kind of myself see a thread that might tie them all together. So Len asks if we would support a national youth cabinet. Daniel Wigfield, asks us if there's a way to better deal with predatory entrepreneurs who are, you know, basically trying to really make a buck by selling the whole elite, you know, promises. And then one of our anonymous attendees asks us if we think the fitness and wellness industries might play a role in integrating and improving youth at the athletic level. And I would say to Len, yes, I would support a cabinet position, but only if it's someone who truly understands this. Like, we don't need a puppet in the cabinet who doesn't truly understand the research, the work that's been done in this area, the organizations like Jon and Aspen Institute. You know, we really need a quality person in there in that role who understands that. But yes, I think the federal funding could then go into programming, to answer Daniel's point, you know, to really help us prevent that type of practice by setting standards, providing resources to other organizations. And that might be where fitness and wellness potentially could come into play with, you know, free play with other, you know, through CrossFit even, or, you know, other types of fitness driven organizations. So to finish this off, Matt and Jon, what do you feel about those last three questions?
Yeah, so I'll say to the predatory club question, I really think we need more transparency somehow, some way, about where parents' money is going to these organizations. I think so many of them would be shocked at how the money is being spent, and some of these coaches or directors making six figures, you know, and there's some organizations out there, national sports organizations, that run travel tournaments where CEOs are making $1 million a year. And this is in youth sports. And we know there also could be a lot of embezzlement sometimes in youth sports. It's a real area that is ripe for more standardizing, or at least transparency. I know there were some efforts, I don't know where it went, but in the state of New Jersey, because one of their Little League baseball teams that went to the Little League World Series a couple years ago, the money just got stolen out of the organization. And there was a push to try to create some state laws around transparency and having to have, you know, promote board meetings and have your 990s available for everyone to see, like on the website. That type of thing I think could help in that area. But it's to Bree's point, I do think it would, to have a national type person, it would have to be someone who really knows what they're talking about. And some of these ideas about regulation may be better suited at the state level, or like at the county level, you know, state commissions or county or city commissions that can still have a pretty impactful effect, but it's just on a more localized basis.
Yeah. I mean, I generally agree with all the points that were made. I think, you know, I was just at the annual meeting for the President's Council, which is, you know, a cool organization with people doing lots of good things. But, you know, when you look at the history of its, you know, the funding and policy making associated, it's impotent, right? It can't really do a whole lot by design. And so that's pretty much what we've had guiding, and well-meaning people, like working hard, doing good things, but without any real teeth to it. And so I would agree that some kind of federal cabinet position or something would potentially be very impactful, you know, with this. And then to Jon's point, I agree, you know, when you look at where we can see change, regulation, yeah, I think it's going to be at the state level, probably. I think that's where we have the most opportunity to do that. And we can see that, like, if a state can pass something that actually like creates a superior sport experience that then in turn benefits its home athletes, other states are going to copy it and do it, right? I mean, we saw that it always works this way, particularly with sports. The name, image, likeness stuff. Florida passed a law starting next summer. You can profit, and you think Texas, California, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York are gonna like let that be a recruiting advantage even at the state level? Like, no, right? So that will then create the change there. Heck, at University of Texas, they've launched a new name, image, and likeness student athlete branding program called Leverage, the first one that's ever been launched. They haven't shared any real details about that yet, but you know, I think we can use this sort of state-based kind of peer pressure and competitive pressure is probably a better way to put it, to actually potentially affect positive change. But that's no easy process, right? But it's about seeing if you can get some of those initial dominoes to fall, and then you can get some momentum going for real change.
Well, I'd like to thank you both, Matt and Jon. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your expertise in this area, and making our third installment of the Chalk Talk such a great experience. So thank you very much for joining us today, or joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was really fun. Good to see you both, and thanks to everybody who tuned in and asked such incredibly thoughtful questions. That was really great.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thanks for being part of it, having me be part of it. Matt, great seeing you.
You too, man.
As always.
See you both soon, I hope.
All right, take care.
Thank you.